We're so excited to introduce our guest today, founder and board president of Endwell. Dr. Shoshana Ungerleider is an internal medicine physician, the host and producer of the Before We Go and TED Health podcasts, and leading voice in healthcare, who regularly appears as a medical expert voice on CNN, MSNBC, and CBS News. She has been involved with 2 Academy Award nominated Netflix documentaries on end of life, and we're so thrilled to talk with her today. Welcome. We are so excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled.
I mean, what a little biography there.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how good your ego feels in this moment, because if I was you, it would feel very good.
Sometimes when I hear it, I'm like, wait, who is that? I don't know.
I'm gonna start pretending that's my bio.
Right.
Like I'm
amazing.
just
Right.
gonna
If
copy
that's
and paste
okay.
it. Yes.
You can have
is that
it.
okay? Can I borrow that a
Thank
little
you.
bit?
So I don't know if I could ever do those kind of or get on a documentary. I mean, maybe, but that's amazing. Were you nervous when you were on documentary? That sounds terrifying to me.
Oh, so I wasn't in the documentary. I
Oh.
produced the documentary.
That
Oh.
sounds scarier,
yeah.
in my opinion. Actually, that is more responsibility. If you're on it, at least they can cut you.
Right.
If you're
Right.
producing it, you got
They would have
skin in the
definitely
game,
cut
baby.
me.
Okay,
No, that's
well,
right.
we're so excited, and you also have an amazing new podcast out. So first of all, tell people a little bit about yourself. You have an amazing story. We'd love to hear more about.
Thank you. So I am a practicing internal medicine doctor, and many years ago started an organization called Endwell, focused on kind of making the end of life part of life and trying to normalize conversations about death and dying and grief and loss. But from not necessarily a medical perspective. Throughout my training, I was struck by, how we do death badly as a healthcare system and then as a society. We don't think about it. We don't talk about it. We certainly don't plan for it often enough. And how that plays out for people is far too many get care in and around the end of their lives that they don't want or they don't understand, and doesn't honor the life that they've lived. And that was painful to witness as a new physician, and so started this organization to kind of try to change the cultural narrative around death and dying. And 2 years ago, my father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and I became his caregiver, and I was blown away by just how hard all of it is in the best of circumstances. I'm an expert on end of life. I have connections at hospitals and resources and no palliative care doctors and hospice nurses. And it was still such a challenging road. And so I wanted to share the story because I felt like it could hopefully help other people who are navigating similar experiences. And there's many twists and turns along the way. I sort of am diagnosed with my own issue where I have to face my own mortality in the context of my dad's illness and death, which of course wasn't expecting. But I learned so much about it through the journey. And so that's what the show is about. And it sounds like it's really intense and sad. There are moments of that, but it's also moments of joy and humor. And it's an 8-episode sort of docu-series style show. And we're about halfway through the episodes at this point.
That's amazing.
Can I ask, did you find out about your diagnosis like through your dad's illness? Like, is that when you found out about wow.
Yeah. So it turns out, just I'll briefly say without getting too far into the weeds, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and my grandmother had actually died of the same disease. And we're Ashkenazi Jews, and I didn't know that pancreatic cancer is associated with the BRCA mutation, BRCA, which was what Angelina Jolie, has, and was made famous after she decided to have those big preventative surgeries maybe 10 or 12 years ago. I certainly knew about that medically, but I didn't know that beyond breast and ovarian cancer, it's also linked to pancreatic cancer, prostate cancer, and melanoma. And so I would have never gotten tested had my father not gotten sick. And so I sort of see it as this silver lining in this horrible situation that his illness may have saved my life.
Well,
You know, I know a lot of like medical professionals. We're in Philly and there's like a lot of hospitals around here. So it's like
Yeah.
very easy to run into a medical professional. And you find, you know, a lot of the time that like because they work in a hospital, like it's very easy to become desensitized to death and dying.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering for you as an internal medicine doctor, physician, um, just like what that experience was like experiencing your own grief as you kind of have been in the medical field and like what that was like for you.
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot of levels to that. I think um, my dad got sick really suddenly. Like he was super well and in his 70s, but like was out jogging and swimming every day for hours, traveling the world, working full time. So it sort of hit me like a ton of bricks. And because of my medical training, knew that pancreatic cancer is one of the ones you don't want to get. It's almost certainly a death sentence because it's caught really late. There aren't a lot of symptoms associated with it, and there's no screening for it typically. So people get it, and then within 9 months or a year, they're gone. And so I think knowing that was both really, really hard, but in some ways helpful for me because I kind of knew how this journey was going to go. And I was more mentally prepared than, say, my husband was or my sister, who thought, well, dad's sick, but we're getting, he's going to do chemo and we hope that he gets better. And because he had this genetic mutation, he was eligible for these new targeted therapies that have been extending life for many years beyond what we typically see with advanced pancreatic cancer. So we had some hope. But I would say, just in general, it was this really interesting and hard experience of creating boundaries for myself, because the family looks to me, as the authority in medicine and the one that everybody leans on when a medical thing comes up, because I'm the only doctor in the family. And I had to really sort of create these boundaries around, well, Dad, I am a doctor. I am not your doctor. I'm your daughter. And I can be here to walk beside you and support you in these ways and give you my opinions on things, but you need to listen to your care team. I can't get involved in the day-to-day medical decision making. And then I also, around my own diagnosis, underwent major surgeries as he was dying, and really felt the need to do that for myself, which was a hard decision to make because it felt selfish. But so all that to say, I think that in medicine, we certainly create walls around ourselves because it's a lot to take care of sick people. And then certainly when it's your own family member, trying to find that balance of support and love, and then, helping solve problems. It's really hard.
Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Creating those walls that it's almost like necessary in order
Yeah.
to, do your job and take care of people. Like almost like, there's humanness in it, but a part of you has to kind of be cut out of it in order to create that separation. So funny you talk about like not being the doctor for your family and creating those boundaries. And I look at Emmalee and we're smiling because as therapists, the same thing happens to us in our
Are,
families of like being.
are you an oldest daughter? What's your birth order? Can I just ask that?
Yeah, I'm the oldest. I just have one sister. She's a couple years younger. And then I've just learned this new phrase from another therapy podcast that I did. I was the parentified child.
Yeah.
Oh,
And I
welcome.
said,
Welcome. We are
Our listeners know that phrase well.
We
And look
too.
at you. Yeah. But a parentified child is someone who does wonderful in the medical field because you've already been taking care of someone for a very long time. Right? You were
Feels
trained
natural.
to do this.
Yeah.
If it's okay, I'd love to ask a little bit about you talking about the guilt. Right.
Mhm.
So you talked about that you were making a decision to go through major medical surgeries while also your dad was, really dying.
Yeah.
You talk about guilt you felt about that. Could you tell us a little more?
Yeah. Well, I was someone who, after finding out about the fact that I had this genetic mutation that put me at increased risk for breast and ovarian cancer, and then also later on in life, pancreatic and these other cancers, and also being a doctor, I've seen how those cancers can go. And certainly, we have wonderful treatment now for breast cancer and screening, so you don't have to opt for preventative surgery. However, with ovarian cancer, we can't screen for that really. And so the recommendation is typically to have your ovaries and fallopian tubes removed, in your 40s or earlier if you're done having children. For me, I didn't ever want children. And so it was a really easy decision to say, hey, let's start there. I felt like I couldn't sit with the uncertainty of having what I would consider a ticking time bomb in my body. And again, because ovarian cancer is often caught very late, it is also not always fatal, but very, 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 very often caught too late for good treatment. And so I almost immediately, within a couple of months, scheduled that surgery, and then a few months later decided to have a mastectomy with reconstruction. Again, because, I've just seen these diseases go really badly for people. And I wanted to do what I could to avoid, that situation. And I think that's what I know that's what my dad would have wanted to. It was just the timing was really, really hard. And I had to take a step back from the caregiving role. And thank God my husband was so supportive in taking care of my father and me through that whole journey. But it like anybody, I just felt like I was, by focusing on myself and my own health in the midst of my dad's illness, it was a hard decision to say, like, it's okay for me to do this for myself.
Yeah.
But I am so glad that I did, and that people encouraged me. My family members, my friends said, this is okay. I almost needed that permission from someone else to feel like I could really take that time for me.
Yeah. And you bring up like a very, I think, important point too, because um, you know, when someone's sick and there's a caregiver in the family, someone who's taking care of them, there's a lot of emphasis on the person who's sick and the person, of course. But the care is, there is less care around the caregiver. And I think that is also a really important conversation. And there is a lot of guilt that comes with, like, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way, or I shouldn't be struggling, or I shouldn't take care of myself because this person is dying or this person is really struggling.
Yeah.
And so I think that in general is just such an important conversation to have, is that, like, the caregiver role, just in, normal circumstances, if we can call them normal, is difficult. You had a very extenuating circumstance where, like, you were also dealing with, your own mortality and carrying this gene and having these really intense surgeries. So I think that just, the permission for caregivers to be able to also take care of themselves, that's so important as a caregiver, to be able to care for yourself in order to care for others.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's also the thing I'm thinking about for our listeners, right? Is that the average age of our listeners, what the average age is 30 to 45, and it's women. And they're at the age of making these hard decisions like the one you had to make. And I've heard a lot of people say time and time again, well, I haven't actually had a scare, so should I do this? I've heard people say, am I being dramatic? And I love
surgery.
They're saying that, like, oh, well, if I have the double mastectomy, but I haven't actually had anything happen, I'm being dramatic, right? Like this fear of what the outside world will think about you when you make a decision to take care of your health. Mm-hmm. And let's be honest, right? We don't, as a society, don't really care about women's health. So that could also be a large part of why that is. But we're talking something, in some ways, it's this beautiful gift to give yourself. But I think that we as women have been taught to put ourselves on the back burner or wait or not take care of ourselves in this way. And so the way you're talking about this, I just think is really beautiful. And it feels like you're giving permission as well, for other people to do something that would just make them feel better. Why have this on your body?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And peace of mind alone, not having to worry about, having to get a mammogram or an MRI every 6 months. And oh my gosh, is this going to be the time when maybe there's something there? I mean, there's so much. I think I just want to go back, something that Jen said about caregivers and caring for themselves. We know the data actually show that that people, and again, as you pointed out, this is often women, although there are certainly men caregivers as well, that they face numerous chronic health conditions and actually die younger, as a result of being a caregiver. So you really do need to think about your own health and well-being through this journey, as hard as that is. And gosh, I would just say, for anyone, who's like thinking about, has a genetic mutation or is high risk for breast cancer or ovarian cancer, thinking about your own health and avoiding something as major as cancer, that is not a small thing. That's not being dramatic. That is, it's being a good partner. That's being a good parent. That's, I think, cancer is serious business. And I would encourage anybody, if they want to know about their own kind of potential genetic risk, to get genetic testing and to certainly consult with a physician about, how to reduce your risk. It's like the best thing I've ever done for myself. And I'm so grateful every day that I don't have to be thinking about, these concerns, these health risks.
Absolutely.
Is that something people could, for everyone listening, that's like, oh shit, I should do this, right? Is that something people could just request from their primary care? Like how do you recommend people go about getting this?
So it's a little bit tricky. I talk about this a lot in the podcast that, doctors aren't trained in genetics. And because so much has changed in the last 5 to 10 years in terms of our understanding, like, for example, I didn't know, right, that pancreatic cancer was associated with the BRCA mutation. And I only trained like 10 years ago. I was shocked to learn this. So, yes, you can certainly go to your doctor and say, I want to do genetic testing based on my family history. It depends a little bit as to whether or not insurance will cover it. If you own, it's typically only if you have relatives who have had these cancers. But there are ways now to go straight to, like, bypass your doctor, which I often recommend people do, because we as doctors don't have enough time to sit and talk about these important things, and we may not know about them. And we sort of gatekeep, genetic testing from our patients far too often. I am somebody who believes that anybody who wants genetic testing should be able to access it. There is a small, out-of-pocket amount that you have to pay, but organizations like JScreen, for example, does, really affordable genetic testing and counseling. Genome Medical is another company that does direct-to-consumer genetic testing and counseling. I think it's really, the counseling piece of it's really important, because you don't want to just get a test and then have a result that you don't know what to do with. That's not helpful. I've talked to a lot of women that have had that happen, and it's really, really scary, because you're like, wait, what? I have this genetic mutation. What does this mean? So thinking about all of that ahead of time is really important. But people should know that these tests are affordable. They're, if they're covered by insurance, it's free. If it's not, it's a few $100s max. They're easy to do. You do it through saliva, and you do it at home, and then you send it in. And this is actionable information. This is, you're not just getting results where you're like, oh no, my fate is sealed and I can't do anything about it. There's actually steps you can take to lower your risk, which is, I think, so helpful. And I felt so empowered by knowing this information for myself.
Okay, can I tell a story just for levity? Wait, I have a
yeah.
good
Wait,
genetic
I do love that, and I also have a question. Also,
yeah.
for
Well,
levity.
you go first, and then okay. Oh, both levity. Yeah, fuck yeah. What do you got?
What are your thoughts about 23andMe?
Oof.
Are you selling your DNA to are you paying the government to take your DNA?
Did I send my DNA to the government? And should I close my account?
So, I mean, full disclosure, I actually have like consulted with 23andMe. So I actually love what they're doing. I think that there is some confusion about kind of the privacy laws around genetics. I think that they actually do a good job if you read their fine print about, how people can opt in to sharing data versus not. So I think that's really important. Any test you do, right? Like think about the consequences and ramifications, whether it's, life insurance or other, about like where this information is going to go. Just like anything we do, we're logging into Facebook and we're giving them our, information as well. And so I think being really thoughtful about that stuff it's a great question. They have actually just launched a total health product where they weren't doing medical grade genetic testing before. They were doing other sort of small bits of looking at genetics that were maybe not as, they were interesting, but maybe not actionable information from a medical perspective. And literally in the last like 6 months, they've launched a new product that's driven by physicians that really looks at, a full panel of genetic sequencing that is helpful for people in terms of thinking about like BRCA and other illnesses. So I am a fan of 23andMe.
Okay, great.
I would say, and that's actually a great avenue to go as well. If you're interested in direct to consumer testing, because you actually be working with a doctor and all of that. Okay. You can cut this part out if this is like
no, actually, no.
Maybe they'll sponsor the episode.
Yeah, I was just gonna say this isn't sponsored, but it sounds sponsored, yes. Right? And I also love that because the only, it told me information, but some of it was like, what kind of earwax do you have? Yeah.
And I think that's important information to have.
Not actionable.
But also I was more like, Jen, you paid them just to find out you're 99.9% Ashkenazi. Like I could have told you that.
Right. I know. That's right.
Okay.
So we have a bunch of Ashkenazi Jews on the podcast.
Yeah, it's all of us. Okay. So listen, here's my levity conversation. So my daughter was born and she has polydactyly. So if you don't know what polydactyly is when you're born with many fingers and many toes. Yeah. Now my husband is from Western Pennsylvania, and are you from the West Coast originally? You're from the East Coast.
I'm from Oregon. Yeah, the West Coast.
Yeah. You seem like you could have been a New York Jew, but wow, Oregon. Okay.
I get that a lot.
Yes, I see it. Welcome. Okay. So, so you don't know Western PA, but just so you know, it's really fun to make fun of. And so from the second this happened, I was like, this is definitely from my husband's side. He's from Western PA. Who knows what they got going on over there? Okay. So then we go in and we used to do all of this. I had 4 miscarriages after my daughter. We have to go in for all this genetic testing, right? So like I did the thing where we paid $1,500 and we got, a full fucking scan of everything. Yeah. And it turns out it's from me. And it actually comes from me and a recessive gene I have for bridal Bartle X. So we're sitting in this meeting with the geneticist and she's like, oh yeah, this is because you have this. And my husband looks at me and he goes, are you fucking kidding me? You have been saying the polydactyly came from me all these years. And so listen, you get a lot of interesting information when you do this testing. And yes, it is expensive. And I wish that everything was more accessible, but you'd be surprised how wonderful it is to have this information.
Except for that information.
Except for then you
right?
find out.
Right.
The polydactyly is from me, even though I don't show it.
Oh my gosh. Amazing. Well, and I would say it's getting cheaper too. And JScreen does a wonderful job of making it, much more accessible for people and not just Jews. Like anybody can get screening from them, and counseling. So yeah. Can we talk about, sorry, I didn't realize we could go into this, but
you can talk about anything you want.
Anything. You could go into
you
everything.
Guys watched Nobody Wants This?
Yes.
Of course.
So
obsessed.
So listen, so Jen and I's claim to fame is that we've been on Aaron and Sarah's Foster's podcast, which is what it's based on, multiple times.
Amazing.
And
oh my gosh, I'm going to listen.
Yes. And so now you'll have to go back and look at our episode. So the show was amazing, but it's funny. We were with Danny Maltby, who also has the Woman podcast.
I know Danielle very well.
Danielle. Okay, so we were at lunch with Danny yesterday.
What? Yes.
So Danny was in yesterday. Danny was in Philly doing something for Figs yesterday. So we're all out to lunch. And she's like, well, did you guys see that? I felt like it could have been seen against Jews. And we're like, nah, that's just how it is.
That's how it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I saw
So
it and I was like, yeah,
protective.
that is like pretty on
Which
point.
Danny yesterday, how protective was she yesterday?
Yeah,
she was
she
like,
was so
I feel
protective.
like that was making all my Jewish friends
And we
look
were all
bad.
like,
I was like,
no,
No.
that's pretty accurate.
I mean, Sasha's wife. Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
exactly.
Amazing.
Right. Incredible.
it was all on the money, baby.
So relatable.
It was so good. I'm so glad they're doing a second season. Although I will say this, on her podcast, apparently she was saying like, oh, this isn't like, it wasn't really true. His family didn't really treat me like this. And I was like, I don't know if I buy that.
Oh, so it's really based on their
Yes.
their lives.
Yes.
Wow. I didn't realize
But he
that.
wasn't, but her husband's not a rabbi, but I think he was
Okay.
Orthodox.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to Google that. Nikki's
yeah.
on here. Nikki will tell me maybe. She actually is the one who listens to everything. Okay. So we can talk about anything you want. That's the fun thing about this.
Sorry. I really just derailed us big time.
No,
Sorry.
no,
I love it.
honestly,
you can
we
derail more.
love to
I'm talking about
derail.
my kids' fucking extra fingers and toes.
It's okay. Honestly, the best. Nikki says, "Great work, Em."
Thank you.
And also we have just ADHD out the ass.
Yeah,
So
this is what it's
you
like,
should
yeah.
when it's just the two of us, we are just ping ponging to a million.
Oh, this
different
is amazing.
topics.
Yes, this is great. Now we'll come to California. No, or we can meet in Chicago and hang out with Danny because she moved
And
to
get
Chicago
Botox.
now.
And
And
get
get
Botox.
Botox.
That's what we said.
She was literally telling Jen what she should do with her face yesterday.
What should I do with my face? Help me.
Oh my God, you have a beautiful face.
Thank you so much.
But it can
Thank
always
you.
be better.
Yeah. Everything can be tighter, you know?
Yeah, it's true.
Tell you all the stuff you could do about filler, right? And you're
Oh,
like, oh,
yes.
let's come to you then. So, okay, we're gonna ask you a few listener questions.
Okay.
Just to seem stuff before we get to calling BS, because why not? Someone asked, how did you navigate the waves of grief?
Well, I would say I still am navigating them. My dad died, gosh, it's only been about a year and a half. So I would say, and you both know this from, your work as therapists, that grief doesn't follow a roadmap, right? It can hit in waves, and sometimes they're big ones and sometimes they're more gentle. I think, I have found that it's helpful to allow them to come without resisting it. It's hard when you're, in a situation and a wave of grief comes and you're like, oh, I don't want to cry right now. So that's real. But in my own experience, it's clear to me that when I let myself feel fully, even sadness, the more I can create space to heal. And I think holding space for our grief doesn't mean that we're choosing it over joy. It just means we're honoring both our love and our loss because they coexist. Like this is what life is.
Have you found kind of in your grief process or your family's grief process that like people are experiencing the grief differently? And like, how do you navigate that piece of it?
Yes, I would say my sister and I have had vastly different grief journeys with my dad. I think it was interesting. Like when my dad died, I certainly grieved my own loss and still do. And then I also kind of grieve for my sister's pain, which is she's had a much harder time with things. And I think it helps to kind of try to hold space for each other without necessarily needing to fix it. I'm somebody who's like a very kind of goal-oriented problem solver, as many doctors are. And it's been a real exercise for me to just sit in a shared moment of silence or give her a hug or just say that I'm here. And so, I think that's important to just walk beside someone in their journey. And I think I just also want to point out that supporting others while you're grieving can be really draining too. So remembering to take time for self-care and saying like, okay, enough is enough. I need to come back and focus on me and my own experience.
That is such good advice and such a kind of important thing to remember. Because I think when we're grieving and other people around us are grieving, like it can just be such a heavy experience.
Yeah.
And also that piece about not having to fix something. And I think so often, you know, in our society, we want to say the right thing or we want to do something to take the pain away. And there really is nothing you can do. And so I love that piece of it. And earlier you mentioned, you know, just like as a society, we don't really talk about death and we don't really talk about dying. And I know that kind of a lot of your work has been in, you know, talking about it, facing your own mortality. And so I wonder if you could speak to that too, kind of that piece of like talking about death and kind of facing grief, you know, with other people. What does that look like?
Mm. Well, I mean, in the work that I do, it's something that I think about a lot. You know, how can we open the door to a bigger conversation around mortality? And sort of that was coming back to the documentary films. I mean, that was the reason why I got involved with those projects. They're both films are about end of life, medically oriented. But I sort of feel like the more we can shine light in these hidden places, the better we're all going to be equipped to be able to kind of navigate these experiences for ourselves, for our loved ones, in the moments when it really matters. And I think that, you know, when we think about this conversation around death and dying, it's not about necessarily being, you know, excited or happy about the fact that by virtue of living, one day we will all die. I think acceptance is about finding a place where the reality of our mortality can live alongside moments of joy and peace. And it's, you know, hard to psychologically wrap your head around the fact that one day, sorry, this is going to be intense, but everyone you know, including yourself, will be gone.
It's pretty fucked up.
I know, but
it's fucked up. It's also a little freeing.
Yeah.
At the same
The
time.
idea of all the animals being gone is harder for me. If you're like all your pets will be dead, that right. But it is. I like that. That's a good reframe, Jen. That also in some ways it could be freeing. Like that this is we have no control. Like the one thing we have truly no control over.
Well, and I think my big point would be that like how can we take in that fact and let it be a teacher to us all, to wake us up to our lives today in this moment and ask yourself, if time is short, because it is for all of us, right? Am I living the life I want to live? It's about finding a relationship with mortality that hopefully makes your life better every day, no matter how old you are, and encourages you to ask these like bigger, deeper questions about finding meaning and purpose in your life. Because this is it, you know?
Well, let me tell you something that's also gonna, you know, be way more surface level than what we're talking about. Sometimes I say that to myself, maybe not in such an intense way. When I am sitting on my phone, I will literally have to say, what am I doing with my life?
Yeah.
That is what I say. What am I doing with my life? I'm literally wasting my life and my brain cells looking at my phone. And then it gets me up and gets me to like actually be more present in my environment. But sometimes you need something that intense to like wake you up to your life.
You're reflecting on your mortality right there.
I have literally been telling you to delete TikTok since the election.
I know I can't.
And yet you're not doing it.
I know. There's something about it that's feeding me too.
It's not good for you. It's not feeding you. In what way?
I'll get there. Honestly, next time you see me, I'm gonna be like a feral animal.
Yeah.
Literally slowly turning me into a feral animal. So I don't know if what it's feeding me, but it's feeding me something bad. Scary.
Yes. Okay. Here is one that you'd be a perfect person to answer.
Okay.
Yeah. How do I prepare myself for my parent to die?
I mean, so I would say this is a little bit different if the person is sick. But maybe answering this in general, I think preparing for the loss of a parent is profoundly difficult. I think, you know, whether they're well and you're just thinking ahead, or if they're in the throes of an acute illness, I think what can help, if possible, is just spending quality time together and sharing memories and even, if you can, talking openly about life and love, and as much as possible, depending on your relationship that you have, kind of making peace with any unresolved feelings and staying present in the moment. I think that can, create hopefully a foundation, and maybe some resilience that can carry you through when the time comes. But I would just say it is really hard. And there's some preparation around, advanced care planning that we talk about in the context of what kind of care they would want to receive, and then legacy planning and all this other stuff that I could talk for hours about. But I think, high level, it's spending, quality time, which I was so lucky that I was able to do with my dad in the 8 months that he was sick.
So, first of all, this has been incredible. It's been incredible to hear your story. And coming from such like a very specific perspective of like professionally being in the medical field, but then personally going through the journey that you've been through. And so it's just been so incredible to talk to you. But before we end, we love to do a segment on ShrinkChicks called Calling BS, which is calling bullshit on something in your field. It could be absolutely anything. So call some bullshit for us today.
Love it. I'm going to call bullshit on talking about death makes people feel more anxious or fearful. I think the reality is, and actually there's data to support this, open conversations about death and dying can actually help reduce anxiety and help people live more fully, which we talked about, and feeling more prepared and hopefully at peace with the whole thing. Now, that's not to say that that's for everybody, but I would say in general, I think that some people believe that there's this unspoken rule that if we think about it or talk about it, it'll bring bad luck or maybe hasten our own death or something. But I think avoiding these discussions doesn't make death go away. It can actually leave us feeling more unprepared and anxious when it, inevitably becomes part of our lives. And I think acknowledging death and preparing for it can help us, feel less fearful about the unknown. And then certainly thinking about our own mortality, as I said, pushes us to live more intentionally. It can actually bring clarity to what truly matters in our lives and hopefully strengthen relationships and appreciate the everyday moments and focus on who we are at our core.
Wow. Incredible. Thank you
Awesome.
so much. This really has been so wonderful. Where can our listeners find you?
Yes, you can find me at shoshanaungerleider.com. You can listen to the podcast on any listening platform. It's called Before We Go. I'm at Shoshana MD on Instagram, and the podcast is at Before We Go podcast on Instagram. And then with the Endwell work around more generally around end of life, it's at Endwell Project or endwellproject.org.
Amazing.
And all those links will be in today's show notes.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of ShrinkChicks.
We'll see you back here next week for another session.
In the meantime, if you want a question answered or a topic discussed, follow us on Instagram at ShrinkChicks. And if you're looking to get connected with a therapist like us to start or continue your therapeutic journey, visit thetherapygroup.com. Just fill out a contact form on our website, and we will personally match you with one of our amazing therapists. And for all of our therapists and group practice owners out there, we also offer group practice consulting.
And if you're looking to support yourself further and support our show, check out our amazing merch options at shrinkchicks.com/merch and our Know Yourself, Grow Yourself journal on Amazon. Also, if you'd be so kind, we'd love a rating review and for you to share with a friend or an enemy or a mother-in-law, honestly, whoever needs it, so that we can keep reaching more people on our mission to bring mental health topics to your ears every week.
Thanks for being here with us. And don't forget to grow yourself. You got to know yourself.